Good morning.
Good morning.
Nice to see such a full hall, and good job for sitting zazen for anybody who's under 10. Everybody else was a half measure. So today is the Buddha's birthday celebration, and in Japan that always happens on April 8th. And we celebrate it here at Buddha Temple on the Sunday, which is closest to April 8th. And so that this year, that is this Sunday. We're in kind of a funny spot because usually the cherry blossoms are in full bloom at this time. And they were in full bloom until the torrents of rain and wind came last week and ripped all the petals off of the tree. So usually our baby Buddha is covered in cherry blossoms. Some years when the cherry blossoms are early, the apple blossoms will also be early. So there's no cherry blossoms, usually there's apple blossoms, but the apple blossoms are just like, they're just starting to show a little bit of red, but they're not open at all yet. So we have a little bit fewer flowers for the flower festival this year, but of course we have all of you types of flowers. So that's nice. Normally on the Buddha's birthday also, I would tell the story of the Buddha's birth, which is a very interesting and informative story. But this year, we're going to do something a little bit different. We're going to talk about a very important person in the life of Buddha Temple who passed away 2 weeks ago. And that person is the formal title at the temple would be Zen teacher Getsushin Brox, Randi Getsushin Brox. She was a priest at Dharma Rain Zen Center in the lineage of Kyogen Carlson Roshi, who was one of the very important founders of our temple. And when I think about Getchin, the first thing I think about was I wrote her a letter from the monastery in Japan. My family and I had decided that we would move back to the United States. I wanted to start a temple here, and I had heard that there was this sitting group in Eugene, Oregon, which is the place that we had decided that we would come and settle. I grew up in Salem. And I say heard about because if you remember back in the 90s, there wasn't really internet or email or those kinds of things, at least not in the way that we use it now. So I had gotten wind, I had gotten the address somehow, and I was at the monastery because I needed to do a certain amount of monastic training before I could be fully certified to run a temple. And so I was there at the monastery, and I had a little bit of free time, which was rare. And I wrote this letter to Randi Brox, to Getchin. I always call her Getsushin. That would be kind of the right way to say her name, but whenever I would say that, she would say Getchin. She'll always correct me. And then after some time, a few weeks, I think went by. It took about a week for letters to get back and forth across the Pacific. A letter came back and said, "Oh, please join us." And that sealed our fate here at Buddha Temple. My family and I moved to Eugene. That would have been in 1998, the late summer, early fall of 1998. And one of the first things I did was go to sit meditation at Getchin's house, which is on Potter Street in South Eugene. And I believe it was every Tuesday night. Is that right? Tuesday night. Every Tuesday night, there was a group that had been meeting there to practice for quite a long time before that. And so when I called her on the phone, those phones were hooked to the wall at that time. She said, "Why don't you come a little bit early and we'll have a chance to chat before everyone comes together." So I went a bit early, and I think she made me some tea, and we just sat and chatted, and I felt so at home. Even though it was a totally different situation than I was used to in Japan. So the way that I had practiced and the way that I had been raised in the Dharma in Japan was very Japanese, of course, it was Japan. And so here we were in Getchin's living room, and she was like, "Yeah, we're going to sit zazen." And she had this little room, one of the small bedrooms, and maybe 7 or 8 of us could cram in there it sort of felt like cramming to me. And you couldn't do prostrations because there wasn't enough room. And then we would sit zazen, and then afterwards, sometimes Kyogen Carlson Roshi would come down from Dharma Rain Zen Center maybe once a month, and he would give a teaching, or sometimes we would talk about our practice, or sometimes do some kind of readings. And it was such a joy to just sit with the people there together. I wasn't in any kind of leadership position. I just this funny 28-year-old kid that showed up with a robe and said, I want to start a temple. And people took me seriously enough, but thankfully not too seriously, that I could sort of grow up in the Dharma and that environment. So I'm really feel so indebted to Getchin for many reasons, but that central reason was the way that she just met me with real kindness and clarity, and always seemed to me without underestimating or overestimating, and that was very helpful for me. And then pretty soon after that, she moved to Portland. At that time, she was not a priest, and she was very, very involved in teaching Dharma in the prisons. And she moved to Portland to pursue ordination, and mainly she did that, as I understood, because she wanted to be able to offer precepts to people in the prison, which is something that wasn't happening. And to do that, you have to be a lineage holder of the precepts. And so she became a lineage holder underneath her teacher, Kyogen Carlson Roshi, and then she was able to carry on that work in the prisons. Very, very inspiring, and trained many people who then took over and continue that work to today. But when she moved, she let us use her house for 2 years. 3 years?
We paid the second year.
The second year, yeah. But we paid a tiny amount. The first year she said, you can just use the house. And then the second year she said, well, a little bit of money, but was really ridiculously small for the house. And then she needed to sell the house. And so that's really what allowed us to gel as, at that time, the Eugene Zendo. And she would come down sometime and sit with us. And then after we moved from that house, we had a couple temporary spots, and then we came here within a couple years after leaving her place. And she will oftentimes come down for our anniversaries, and we get to see her then. But in the past kind of chunk of years, her health was declining. And so I hadn't seen her for quite some time, maybe before COVID was the last time. And I know that I keep looking at Myoan and Jun-E because they were members of that Sangha from the very beginning. They're older members of the Sangha than I am. I mean, not just in their age, but in the amount of time they've been in the Sangha. And I know that both of you had kept in contact with her through that time. So I just want to ask I'd ask Myoan if you would say a few things. You also have some paper in your hand. I think maybe you're going to say a few things too.
I got the word.
Okay, great. Maybe we'll start with Myoan.
Okay, I'll stand up. So this is not a very long thing, but just to give a little background on her very interesting beginning point. She was born in Hammerfest, Norway, and that is the most northern city. It's really more of a town in the world. Okay. And that is a place where there are like 10 weeks of Nordic winter, where the sun does not touch the horizon. It's black, and that causes a weather event that's very extreme, like sort of ferocious snowstorms and blizzards for this period. So if you can imagine living in that, of course you have the summer that never ends on the other end of things. But that's where she started. And when she was 5 years old in 1940, the Nazis moved in. And they occupied Norway, they occupied Hammerfest. And we had conversations now and then. What was it like living with the Nazis? I mean, it wasn't like they did anything other than they occupied your city and you kind of carried on. And I remember her saying to me, you try not to make a lot of eye contact. And that went on until 1945, when the Russians were moving towards Norway, And they were, to the Nazis, they were the enemy. And the Nazis said, we will burn down this city so there's nothing for them. So the whole Norwegian population of Hammerfest left quickly. So that was her beginning. And, that's a pretty dramatic thing. I will say this too, we had a sort of kind of a Scandinavian bond because my father is from very northern Sweden, right up where the Arctic region is, and our families were only 500 miles apart, so that was kind of a special thing. So she became, as I'm saying, very interested in Buddhism, and became a very deep student of that, and it really changed her life in many ways. She was a very dear friend of mine, and I would say, by nature, she was an introvert. She was deeply intelligent and really a sort of a creative intuitive. I remember her saying to me one time that she had been working on a calculus problem and just couldn't get it. She was very frustrated. And she went to bed frustrated that night, she said, and then she dreamed the solution. That was kind of the way she was. So I still have a card that she sent me, which was very kind of moving in terms of its symbolism. She sent me a card from Norway on one of her visits, and it had a cormorant seabird with its wings outstretched. And it stood on a rock overlooking the sea, and the sun, what she said was, I wanted you to have this because here the bird is saluting both the setting and the rising sun, because this was midsummer, and so the sun comes down, but it never touches the horizon, and then it starts to rise again. And that seems very much the way life can be. So I have a very short little piece that I thought was nice in this book she sent me on Arctic light many years ago. And it is this. Strange how evening reverberates through one and all. Even the crows have golden wings as they fly into the sunset.
I don't mean to stagger around, but I am a little bit. Well, I met Getsushin in probably, I don't know what year, sometime in the early 80s. And it was a while before I started sitting at Potter Street. I'd been sitting with another group, wasn't anymore my friend Lois Stiller, who was also part of the beginning over there at Potter Street, had come back from Green Gulch and said, what are we going to do about sitting? So we decided to go to Potter Street, and we stayed there. And we were very welcomed by Thelma and Getsushin. But I had previously known her. I had been there for the dedication when they came and dedicated that space that she used. So for me, Getsushin there was a way that if you just saw her in a group, you wouldn't notice her. If she wasn't a dramatic person, she didn't stand out, nor did she want to. And she didn't do well with superficial conversation. That was all hard for her. Sitting around a long evening with tea and deep conversation is what she preferred. But I was going to talk a little bit about her professional life, which, as we talked last night, you said she was a remarkable woman, and she was. So her early life was leaving Norway and going to Paris, where she got, I believe, her first degree and became fluent. And she already probably knew some French. She became fluent and was fluent in French as well as English. She was, by the age of 26, hired as a professor at the University of Oregon, where she taught the next 33 years. What she taught was existentialism, French existential literature, and she taught it in French. That was her path. Existentialism led, and we used to talk about this. I had some, so that was her path. Somehow there was a lead into Buddhism through that. And so she remained there, became full professor, did lots of papers, lots of conferences, and had a very successful career there. But she was truly, once she started practicing Buddhism, which was sometimes in the 80s, Kyogen and his wife were living in Eugene at that time. So there was actually a group here. And before they went to Portland and started Dharma Ring, and that's where she started slowly getting involved, and eventually, of course, Kyogen was her teacher. So once she got on that path, the teaching, all of that, she used to continue, but it fell away for her as primary. Buddhism became primary. And so you've already heard about that progression. And then at some point, Kyogen asked her, well, we'd been talking in the group about doing prison work and doing volunteer training and all that. So then he asked her to see two men on death row. They were asking for Buddhist teachers, and that became a focal point of her life. And they, of course, died there. They never got new trials or whatever all that was. And she did do Jukai with both of them. And then she is responsible, I think this is true, for any meditation programs that now occur at the Oregon prisons. And the last one that she developed and started was at Coffee Creek, the women's prison. And several people here from this group were going to, I believe, the medium, right? So there are people here who went regularly, and they didn't have enough people, so she asked this Sangha to, if people would be interested in doing that. And so people here did do that for, I think, until COVID, said my memory. So this is the kind of contribution this person made. And it mattered the most to her. So she did some memoir, and I think the third section is about Buddhism and her work. So this person, you might not notice in a big group, had all this strength and a really complex mind and deep practice. And she had done the 3 months training at Tassajara, the San Francisco mountain monastery, which is very rigorous, very hard. She was a little thin. By the time she finished that, they ate fast, and she was a slow eater. Anyway, so we had lots of great times, as well as all this seriousness. The three of us used to go up and hike the McKenzie River Trail, and sometimes stayed up there in a cabin. I had lots of times at the house in Hawthorne, where she lived until the Dharma Ring moved. But then I wanted to just talk a little bit about the other side of her, which was very physical. She didn't look that way, but this woman cross-country skied every winter. She would cross-country ski in Portland if they had enough snow. A major hiker in different parts of the world. And then I invited her to come on a river rafting trip with me. My son worked on the Middle Fork of the Salmon River in Idaho. So she was all for it. And I went to pick her up. I drove up, picked her up. And I always remember it was the night that Obama gave his first big speech at the Democratic Convention, and everybody was saying, wow, who is this guy? And she said, come in, he's giving this speech. So she was always aware of what was happening politically. So we drove across all the way to Ketchum, Idaho, and met up with the group, and we were flown into it's called the put-in, where you get on the rafts, actually. So we had to be flown in a small plane because, of the water. So This is a 5-day trip on a magnificent river with a lot of side hikes. And at some point, the guides were saying, my son James was there, that people could go in inflatable kayaks. Well, before they were trying to give instruction, because they're a little bit, shaky, those kayaks. Well, before they could actually get the instructions out, she went and got in, and he's yelling, about the, and she just shot off down the river, and he said, well, she's gone. So, but she didn't flip, she didn't do it. She just went straight through. So this is another aspect of her. She had, I don't think, any physical fear. And she loved that trip. There was one guide who'd spent a lot of time in Thailand, and they had long discussions about the antique houses, and her daughter-in-law was from Indonesia. I think that she had made a big trip to Indonesia. She may have visited I think the largest stupa in the world is in Indonesia. So she traveled a lot. She had taught twice in Africa, and I met her right after that second time. So this was a remarkable person, and had survived everything we just talked about and made a huge contribution, and really was the touch point for what we are now. And that support, and I always wanted to bring her down, and she wanted to come, and we just couldn't get it worked out as she got deeper into dementia. And but she was she would like me to tell her about it, and it made her very happy to know that this is what had happened. It was very important to her. So I'll just end here, and it's great gratitude to her. And I'll say on a last note that I loved her.
May I have a tiny thing? Our tradition of saying names and going around and saying names and then repeating them, that started at the old Eugene Sendo. So just add that little tiny thing.
So we'll have the ceremony now. There will be a short ceremony at the beginning, which is a kind of chanting for Getchin. So that's a little bit different than we normally do. And inside of that, there will be a little bit of, at one point, I'll ask the assembly to recite the names of the Buddha. If you don't know what that is, just enjoy that recitation. If you do, please join in. And then there'll be a recitation of the Great Compassionate Heart Dharani, which is in the normal Sunday morning sutra book. And then after that, then there'll be the recitations for the celebration of the Buddha's birth and the Heart of Great Perfect Wisdom Sutra. Is that right, Daorun? Heart of Great Perfect Wisdom Sutra? Good. And then there'll be some call and response chanting where you hear it and then you respond with it. And then as we're chanting the mantra of Shakyamuni Buddha, then the whole assembly come forward and bathe the body of the Buddha. And don't be too linear about that. Just there's 3 scoopers, so kind of come from all directions and scoop a couple times and then hand to the person behind you and return to your seats. It does occur to me that it's quite profound to have this celebration of a person's life at their death among the celebration of a birth. If we pay attention, this is actually always the way it is, that these two are completely indivisible. I mean, your life is the evidence of their indivisibility. You show up here and you're going to disappear at some point, and everything in between there is you. And that's I can say that with some joy, although when we lose somebody, that's also very difficult. So just encourage you to reflect on that today as we practice together. And then afterwards, there will be delicious rice pudding, which is always our tradition. So please stay around afterwards and have some rice pudding and chai tea or coffee or all three, and some chat.